Hey guys, tonight we're talking about a very American idea, that if something is legal it must be safe enough, and if it comes from a plant it must be gentle, and if you can buy it at a gas station it must not matter very much. So that idea ends up somewhere familiar. Behind the counter, next to supplements and energy shots, small bottles with names most people can't pronounce, they contain Kratom, a drug that binds to the same brain receptors as morphine, a drug people use to escape opioid withdrawal, a drug that, in another regulatory universe, would require a doctor, a warning label and supervision. Instead, it requires $20 and a cashier who doesn't ask questions. Tonight, we're talking about how a leaf became an opioid substitute, and how it slipped into American life so quietly that most people never noticed it happening. But before we get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment, telling me where in the world you're lying right now, perhaps tucked under a blanket halfway between curiosity and sleep. Now dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. To understand how a gas station became America's unlicensed opioid dispensary, you first have to understand what people were running from. Not the concept of addiction, the actual physical experience of withdrawal. Picture this, it's 4 a.m. You're lying in a bed that feels like it's made of broken glass and hot needles. Your skin is crawling, not metaphorically, actually crawling, like every nerve ending has decided to audition for a horror movie simultaneously. You're sweating through sheets you already sweated through an hour ago. You're freezing. You're burning. You're both somehow in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. Your legs won't stop moving. They kick and twitch and jerk like they're trying to run away from your body, which honestly seems reasonable, because your body has become a prison that's also on fire. Restless leg syndrome, the doctors call it, which is like calling a hurricane restless weather syndrome. The name doesn't capture the experience of wanting to crawl out of your own skeleton. Your stomach cramps, not hunger cramps, the kind where your intestines have apparently decided to practice origami without anesthesia. You've already thrown up everything you've eaten in the last 3 days. Now you're throwing up things you're pretty sure you ate in 2019. The diarrhea is worse than the vomiting, and the vomiting is already biblical. And through all of this, the sweating, the shaking, the gastrointestinal apocalypse, your brain is screaming one thing over and over with the subtlety of a car alarm that's also somehow your mother's voice. You know what would fix this. You know exactly what would fix this. It's one phone call away, one text, one drive to the part of town you swore you'd never visit again. This is opioid withdrawal. This is what millions of Americans discovered after the pill stopped coming. The pill stopped coming because America finally noticed it had a problem. By 2015, the opioid crisis had killed enough people that ignoring it required actual effort. Doctors who'd been handing out OxyContin like Halloween candy suddenly got nervous. Pharmacies started asking questions. The DA began breathing down necks. The pill mills that had been operating like drive-through windows for narcotics found themselves facing consequences, which in America usually means someone's profit margin was finally threatened. The prescriptions dried up. Reformulated OxyContin couldn't be crushed anymore. The supply of legal opioids contracted like a fist closing around millions of throats. The demand did not contract. That's not how addiction works. Addiction doesn't read policy papers. Addiction doesn't care that the government had a change of heart. Addiction just keeps demanding what it demands, and when the legal supply disappears, it finds other options. Some people found heroin, cheaper anyway. The suburban mom who'd been taking OxyContin for her back met the same dealer her gardener's nephew used. Class barriers dissolve fast when withdrawal is the alternative. Some people found fentanyl, usually by accident, usually fatally. The death toll climbed faster, and some people, millions of people, started looking for a third option. Something that wasn't heroin. Something that wasn't illegal. Something they could tell themselves was different. They were desperate. Desperation doesn't comparison shop. Desperation Googles things at 4 a.m. while lying in a puddle of its own sweat, searching for any word that isn't drug, but might still mean relief. The searches looked like this: natural pain, relief no prescription, herbal opioid alternative, how to stop withdrawal naturally, legal ways to feel normal again. The algorithm noticed the desperation. The algorithm always notices. And the algorithm started serving up a word these searchers had never seen before: Kratom. The first Americans to find Kratom weren't desperate people in withdrawal. They were internet explorers, forum dwellers, the kind of people who spent the early 2000s on message boards with names like Erowid and Blue Light, cataloguing every obscure psychoactive plant they could find. These were hobbyists, ethnobotany enthusiasts, people who ordered strange powders from overseas vendors just to see what would happen, then wrote detailed trip reports for strangers. They found Kratom the same way they found Kava, Salvia, and a dozen other plants most people have never heard of, by reading obscure research papers and asking, has anyone tried this? By 2005, a small community had formed, forums dedicated entirely to Kratom, vendors with names like Coastal Kratom and Herbal Salvation shipping powder in Ziploc bags, users debating strains like Wine Connoisseurs, Red Bali for relaxation, White Mangda for energy, Green Malay for something in between. The science behind these distinctions was questionable. The enthusiasm was not. Head shops started carrying it. Smoke shops. The kind of places that sold bongs labelled for tobacco use only, and had a certain studied vagueness about what anything was actually for. Kratom fit right in. Another powder in a grey zone, another product with a wink. For years this was Kratom in America, small, niche. A secret passed between strangers on the internet. The people who used it felt like they'd discovered something special. A hidden corner of the botanical world that the mainstream hadn't ruined yet. Then the opioid crisis hit. The prescriptions dried up. And suddenly, Kratom wasn't a secret anymore. The desperate came looking. And what they found looked like exactly what they needed. The word looked like a typo. Sounded like a Pokemon. Came from somewhere vaguely exotic, which in American marketing terms means probably healthy. The websites promised everything: natural, herbal, plant-based, ancient wisdom from Southeast Asia. Used for centuries, not an opioid, not a drug, a supplement, a tea. A leaf that indigenous people have been chewing forever without any problems, so obviously it was safe. Because nothing from nature has ever hurt anyone, except for literally most of nature. The testimonials were overwhelming. Kratom saved my life. I was spending $200 a day on pills. Now I spend $30 a week on powder. I quit a 15-year heroin habit with this stuff. My doctor abandoned me. Kratom didn't. The stories were true. That's the part that makes this complicated. Some of those people really did quit heroin. Some of them really did find something that felt like salvation. So you order some. You wait 3 days that feel like 3 geological epochs. The package arrives in generic brown packaging, like a vitamin shipment, like something healthy, like something that definitely isn't about to rearrange your brain chemistry in ways you haven't agreed to. You measure out a dose. You mix it with orange juice because the taste is apparently somewhere between lawn clippings and despair. You drink it. And then you wait. The first time Kratom works on someone in withdrawal, it feels like God finally returning a phone call. 20 minutes, maybe 30. The crawling under your skin starts to quiet. The restless legs stop auditioning for their own separate Netflix series. The cramps in your stomach unclench, one fist at a time. The screaming in your brain. You know what would fix this. Drops to a whisper, then a murmur, then something close to silence. You're not high. That's the strange part. You don't feel like you've taken a drug. You feel like you've stopped being tortured. The absence of agony isn't ecstasy. It's just absence. Just quiet. Just the feeling of being a person in a body that isn't actively trying to destroy itself. You stand up, you walk to the bathroom, you look at yourself in the mirror, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, you recognize the person looking back. Not healthy, exactly, but human, present, capable of something other than suffering. Users describe it in terms that sound religious because the experience is religious in the oldest sense of the word. Relief from suffering, deliverance from torment, the feeling that something out there heard your prayers and decided just this once to answer. Like someone turned off the alarm that had been ringing for years. Like taking off a backpack full of rocks I forgot I was carrying. Like being handed back my own life. The people who felt this weren't lying. The relief was real. The gratitude was real. The sense that they'd finally found an exit from a burning building, that was real too. What they didn't know yet, what nobody told them, because nobody selling the stuff had any incentive to mention it, was why the relief felt so familiar. It felt familiar because their opioid receptors recognized what was happening. It felt familiar because at the molecular level they hadn't escaped anything. They'd just changed suppliers. The relief worked because of a tree that had been minding its own business in Southeast Asia for millions of years, quietly evolving alkaloids, bothering no one. Mitrachina speciosa, related to the coffee plant, which explains some things. Native to Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, places where tropical forests do their thing without asking permission from the FDA. For centuries, workers chewed the leaves. Farmers, labourers, people doing back-breaking work in heat that would melt a Midwesterner. A few leaves meant a little energy boost. A few more meant the back pain shut up for a while. It was the botanical equivalent of a strong cup of coffee that also gave you a hug. Nobody was getting wrecked. Nobody was forming dependencies. The dose was self-limiting because human jaws get tired and human stomachs get full. You can only chew so many leaves before your face goes on strike. The trees grow wild in places most Americans will never see. Jungle regions of Indonesia primarily, Borneo, Sumatra. Places where the humidity hits you like a wall and the forest floor never fully dries. For Indonesian farmers, Kratom became a cash crop in the 2010s. Better money than palm oil, better money than rubber. American demand was insatiable, and the trees just kept growing. Whole villages shifted their economy around the harvest. Families who'd been subsistence farming for generations suddenly had buyers offering American dollars for dried leaves. The supply chain runs through middlemen in Jakarta and Surabaya, gets packaged in warehouses that range from professional to questionable, and ships out in containers labelled botanical specimen or herbal tea, or whatever phrasing keeps customs from asking too many questions. By the time it reaches an American gas station, the powder has travelled 8,000 miles and passed through a dozen hands. Nobody along the way is required to test it. Nobody's required to verify what's actually in the bag. The farmers don't use extracts. The farmers chew leaves, the old way, the way that worked for centuries. They watch the containers ship out and wonder what Americans are doing with all of it. They'd be surprised. America has never met a plant it couldn't improve into a crisis. Coca leaves worked fine for centuries, turned into cocaine, then into crack. Poppies were manageable, refined into heroin, then into fentanyl. Give Americans something natural and useful and they will extract, concentrate and optimize until someone's dead. Kratom was next. First came the powder. Dry the leaves, grind them up, ship them across an ocean, already stronger than chewing, same chemicals, faster absorption, no jaw fatigue, but still recognisably plant, still had some guardrails. Then someone asked the inevitable question, what if we made it stronger? The extracts arrived, solvents to pull out the active ingredients, throw away the fibre, concentrate what's left. Now a little goes a long way. Someone who'd been using powder for months might try an extract and end up somewhere they didn't pack for. Then someone asked again, what if we made that stronger? The shots appeared. Little bottles, bright labels. Gas station checkout counter right next to the 5-hour energy. Names like OPMS, officially organically purified Mitragina speciosa. But everyone knew what those letters were winking at, subtle like a sledgehammer. Then someone asked one more time, what if we just isolated the thing that actually works? And this is where it helps to understand what's actually in the leaf. Inside Kratom are dozens of chemicals, most of them are wallpaper. They're there, but they're not doing much. 2 of them run the show. The first is called mitragynine. It's the main ingredient, relatively mild. Coffee's weird cousin. If that were the whole story, we wouldn't be here. The second is called 7-hydroxymitragynine. The name sounds like a failed password. Everyone calls it 7-OH because life is too short for 7 syllables. 7-OH makes up a tiny fraction of the natural leaf, less than 1%, often just a trace. Tiny amount. Background player, except it's not. 7-OH is the one doing the real work. The other stuff opens the door. 7-OH walks in and rearranges the furniture. It latches onto the same parts of your brain that morphine latches onto. The same parts heroin uses. Fentanyl, oxycodone, all of them. Same lock, different keys. And 7-OH fits that lock beautifully. Your brain doesn't check IDs. Doesn't ask where the molecule came from. Doesn't care if it grew in a rainforest or got synthesized in a lab in New Jersey. Your brain just recognizes the shape and says, oh, this one, the one that makes everything feel okay. More of this, please. That's why the relief felt so familiar. That's why people in withdrawal felt like they'd come home. Their brains recognized the shape. Same lock, same key, different packaging. So when someone asked, what if we just isolated the thing that actually works? They were asking about 7-OH. And the answer arrived on gas station shelves. The 7-OH products showed up. Not Kratom with some 7-OH in it. Pure 7-OH with some Kratom sprinkled around for appearances. The active ingredient extracted and maximized. Natural the way a bullet is natural because it's made of metal from the earth. Each generation stronger than the last. Each one further from the tree and closer to the pills people were running from. The market rewarded potency because the market always rewards potency. And nobody, not the FDA, not the DEA, nobody with authority was paying enough attention to slow it down. Actually, that's not entirely fair. Someone tried. Once. In August 2016, the DEA made an announcement. Kratom was about to become a Schedule I controlled substance. Same category as heroin. Same category as LSD. Illegal to possess, illegal to sell, illegal to exist without risking federal prison time. Funny thing. Thailand had actually banned Kratom back in 1943. Not to protect people, to protect the opium trade. Workers were chewing Kratom instead of buying taxed opium. The government was losing revenue. So they banned the safer plant to keep the dangerous one profitable. America, land of the free market, couldn't even manage that. The DA doesn't usually announce these things in advance. Usually they just do it. Sign the paperwork, update the list, done. But Kratom got a warning. A heads up. 30 days for anyone who wanted to comment. What happened next caught everyone off guard. The comments came, not dozens, not hundreds, over 22,000 of them. Crashing inboxes, flooding phone lines. tsunami of testimonials from people who swore Kratom had saved their lives, cancer patients managing pain without the fog, veterans treating PTSD when the VA couldn't help, addicts who'd crawled out of heroin using this leaf and were terrified of being thrown back. Then came the signatures. Over 140,000 people signed a petition to the White House in 6 weeks. For a plant most Americans had never heard of. Then came the strange bedfellows. Libertarians showed up, furious about government overreach. Pain patient advocates showed up, desperate to protect access. Harm reduction groups showed up, arguing Kratom was keeping people alive. And behind all of them, funding some of the advocacy, writing some of the talking points, the supplement industry, with billions of dollars at stake and a sudden passionate interest in personal freedom. In October, they withdrew the notice, said they needed more research, said they wanted to hear from the public. This almost never happens. The DEA does not back down from scheduling decisions because people got upset. They have scheduled drugs over the objections of the American Medical Association. They don't scare easy. Kratom scared them. Or at least the political firestorm around Kratom scared them. The FDA tried a different approach, warning letters to vendors, import alerts to block shipments, press releases calling Kratom an opioid and linking it to dozens of deaths. The commissioner went on television and said the science was clear. This stuff was dangerous. The industry fired back, accused the FDA of being in bed with pharmaceutical companies who wanted to patent Kratom compounds, pointed to every study that showed benefits, flooded social media with testimonials, hired lobbyists who knew which doors to knock on. The FDA kept warning. The industry kept selling. The states started making their own rules. Banned here, legal there, regulated somewhere else, ignored almost everywhere. A patchwork of laws that made sense to nobody, but guaranteed one thing. The products kept flowing, and through it all, the gas station shelf kept filling up. After the DEA backed down, the industry didn't just survive, it exploded. The American Kratom Association, yes, there's an association, claimed the market hit $1.5 billion by 2023. 15 million Americans had tried it. The product that had been passed around internet forums was now sitting in mainstream retail chains. The money attracted attention. Not just small vendors anymore, supplement companies with marketing departments, investors looking for the next big thing in wellness. The same business logic that had turned CBD into a gas station staple was now eyeing Kratom. The packaging got slicker. The branding got professional. Products that used to come in Ziploc bags with handwritten labels now came in glossy bottles with QR codes and lab-tested stamps. Whether any labs had actually tested anything was another question. Nobody was required to answer it. The gas stations figured out they could charge a premium. A single shot that cost the vendor $2 could sell for $15, $20, $25. The margins were better than energy drinks. The customers came back more often. Store owners didn't ask what was in it. Store owners asked how much they could mark it up. And the people buying it changed too. Not just opioid refugees anymore. Not just chronic pain patients who had been abandoned by doctors. Now it was college kids looking for a study aid. Truck drivers looking for something that wouldn't show up on a drug test. Gym bros who'd heard it to help with workouts. People who had no idea what they were getting into, buying something they'd never heard of a year ago, because it was on the shelf and the shelf meant safe. The industry liked this. Broader customer base, less stigma, less association with addiction and withdrawal. The FDA did not like this. But the FDA had already lost the first round, and the industry was getting bigger every quarter. But here's the thing about escalation. It doesn't stop when it reaches the shelf. It stops when something breaks. By 2024, The products had gotten stronger than anyone in those early forums would have recognized. The powder users, the ones who'd been measuring grams on kitchen scales, mixing it with orange juice, treating it like an herbal supplement, started posting warnings online. Stay away from the shots. The extract hit different, not in a good way. I've been using Kratom for 6 years. This new stuff isn't Kratom anymore. Reddit threads filled with horror stories. People who'd taken one shot expecting the usual gentle lift and ended up nodding off like they'd taken a Percocet. People who'd built a tolerance to powder over years and found themselves in withdrawal after switching to extracts. A harder withdrawal than they'd ever experienced, because the concentrated 70OH had recalibrated their receptors to expect something stronger. The brands kept pushing. MIT 45, OPMS Black, K-Shot. New products launching every month with names designed to signal potency. Gold, Black, Ultra, Platinum. Each one implying it was stronger than the last. Each one competing for the customer who wanted more. The 7OH isolates were the latest frontier. Not extracts. Isolates. The active compound stripped out and concentrated, sometimes synthesized entirely in a lab, then sprinkled back into a product that could technically still be called Kratom because it contained some leaf material. The difference between these products and traditional Kratom was the difference between chewing coca leaves and snorting cocaine. Same origin, completely different ball game. They showed up in gas stations, vape shops, convenience stores and strip malls across America. Little bottles and tablets with concentrated doses that made the original extracts look gentle. Products designed to hit harder, faster, stronger, because the market rewards potency and the market doesn't ask questions about what happens next. The people buying them didn't know they were taking something different. The packaging looked the same. The names sounded the same. The shelf was the same shelf. Why would they think to check? And then the reports started coming in. Emergency rooms seeing something new. Poison control centres fielding calls they couldn't quite categorise. Coroners in small towns trying to figure out what they were looking at. Deaths that didn't fit the usual patterns. Young people, healthy people. People with no history of drug use. People who thought they were taking a supplement. The FDA had been warning about Kratom for years, but this was different. This was the concentrated molecule, isolated and maximized, doing exactly what concentrated molecules do when you remove all the guardrails. The industry said the deaths were exaggerated. Contamination. Other drugs in the system. Bad actors. Not the product itself. The FDA said the industry was lying. 44 deaths, then 91, then more if anyone bothered to count correctly. The researchers said nobody had enough data. The studies contradicted each other. The truth was somewhere in the fog, and the fog was profitable for everyone except the people dying in it. And the gas station just kept making the sale. The tree in Southeast Asia was still there, doing tree things, bothering nobody. But what was being sold in its name had become something else entirely. And the story was just getting started. To understand how we got here, to the shots and the isolates and the emergency room visits, we need to go back to 2016. Back to the moment when the Kratom industry won its first war and immediately started losing the next one without realizing it. The DEA had blinked. The emergency scheduling was dead. 22,000 comments and 140,000 petition signatures had done what almost never happens in American drug policy. They'd made a federal agency back down. The Kratom forums exploded with celebration, victory posts, thank you threads. People genuinely convinced they'd beaten the machine. They probably should have been watching the parking lot. Because while the Kratom community was busy high-fiving each other, pharmaceutical companies were quietly doing something far more interesting than celebrating. They were filing patents. Not on Kratom. You can't patent a plant. but you can patent what you do with it. Methods for extracting the active compounds, processes for synthesizing them in a lab, formulations for time-release delivery, applications for pain, depression, anxiety, opioid withdrawal. The exact same benefits Kratom users have been shouting about for years, now dressed up in the language of our intellectual property law. The paperwork was beautiful in its audacity. The same molecule that FDA had just called a dangerous opioid was being repackaged as a potential breakthrough medication. Dangerous when it comes from a tree and costs $20. Promising when it comes from a laboratory and costs $20 per pill. This is the pharmaceutical version of watching someone dumpster dive behind your restaurant, then open a competing restaurant across the street selling the exact same food at 10 times the price. Same ingredients, different business model. One of them requires a reservation. The Kratom community had won the right to keep buying leaves. The pharmaceutical industry was positioning to own the molecules inside them. In 2017, the FDA got a new commissioner. His name was Scott Gottlieb, and he arrived in Washington with the energy of a man who had found his nemesis. Gottlieb didn't just dislike Kratom, he made it personal. Press conferences, public statements, television appearances. The man talked about Kratom the way most FDA commissioners talk about tainted lettuce, like it had personally wronged him, and he wasn't going to rest until justice was served. There is no reliable evidence, he declared, with the confidence of someone who had decided not to look very hard for evidence, that Kratom is safe or effective for any medical use. He pushed for an emergency ban. He called Kratom an opioid, not opioid-like, not acts on opioid receptors, but an actual opioid, like heroin, like fentanyl, like the pills that were killing 80,000 Americans a year. The framing was deliberate. If Kratom was an opioid, it belonged with the opioids. Case closed. The Kratom community pushed back. Again. More comments, more testimonials, more veterans and chronic pain patients and people who'd crawled out of addiction using this leaf and didn't appreciate being told they were just using another drug. Gottlieb didn't care. He had a computer model. I need you to understand how absurd this was. The FDA took Kratom's molecular structure, fed it into an algorithm designed to predict how compounds interact with opioid receptors, and announced that the computer confirmed Kratom was an opioid. Science had spoken. The algorithm had rendered its verdict. The researchers, actual scientists who study actual substances in actual human bodies, pointed out that running a molecule through a prediction program is not the same as studying what it does in real life. You can't determine a drug's effects by asking a computer what it thinks the shapes look like. That's not science. That's astrology with better graphics. The FDA stood by the model. The model was science. The science was settled. This was the state of the Kratom debate in 2018. An algorithm versus 10,000 testimonials, and nobody willing to fund the studies that might actually answer the question. Then the universe decided to make things interesting, in the worst possible way. Salmonella. The bacteria you associate with gas station sushi and your uncle's famous, it's still good potato salad. It showed up in Kratom products and started spreading across the country like a rumour at a family reunion. By the time the CDC finished counting, 199 people in 41 states had been infected. The contamination was traced to multiple vendors, multiple products, multiple points in a supply chain that stretched from Indonesian jungles to American gas stations, through a series of warehouses, middlemen and shipping containers that nobody was required to inspect. The FDA could barely contain its excitement. See? This is what happens when you let people sell unregulated plant powder from the other side of the world. People get food poisoning. People could die. This is exactly why we need to ban this stuff. The Kratom industry, never missing an opportunity to miss the point, said the outbreak proved they needed quality standards. Their own quality standards. written by them, enforced by them. A self-regulation scheme that would make the Kratom trade look responsible while keeping actual regulators as far away as possible. Nobody suggested the obvious third option: treat Kratom like food. Inspect it, test it, apply the same boring bureaucratic machinery that keeps salmonella out of your spinach and rat droppings out of your cereal. That would require admitting Kratom was a real thing that real people consumed in real quantities. Neither side was ready for that conversation. The death count became the next battlefield. The FDA announced that Kratom had been associated with 44 deaths. Then they updated it to 91. The numbers kept climbing, each update announced with the solemnity of a real crisis and the precision of a rough guess. Associated with is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It doesn't mean caused by. It means was present when someone died. Many of those 91 deaths also involved fentanyl, or benzodiazepines, or alcohol, or prescription medications. When someone dies with 4 substances in their system, blaming one of them is less science and more clue. It was Kratom in the bloodstream with the... What exactly? The industry pointed this out, loudly. Those numbers are garbage. Those deaths prove nothing. You can't count a polydrug overdose as a Kratom death just because Kratom was in the room. Fair point. Also, extremely convenient point for an industry that would prefer the death count to be 0. Here's what nobody mentioned. The real number might be higher. Way higher. Nobody knows because nobody's counting properly. Most coroners don't test for Kratom. It's not on the standard toxicology panel. If you don't specifically request a Kratom test, and why would you if you've never heard of it? The compounds don't show up. Someone could die with a Kratom bottle on their nightstand, and the death certificate would say cardiac arrest, or undetermined, or we don't know, moving on. The system wasn't designed to see Kratom deaths, so it doesn't see them. They fall through a gap in the data. Invisible, uncounted, useful for arguing that the death count is either inflated or incomplete, depending on which side you're on. The fog wasn't evidence of safety. It was evidence that nobody had turned on the lights. In April 2019, Scott Gottlieb resigned as FDA commissioner. The official reason was that he wanted to spend more time with his family in Connecticut. The commute from Washington was hard on him. He was tired. 4 months later, he joined the board of directors at Pfizer. Pfizer, the pharmaceutical giant, the company that manufactures opioid medications, the company that would potentially benefit quite a bit if Kratom got banned as a plant and its active compounds got developed as patentable pharmaceuticals that Pfizer could sell. Is this proof that Gottlieb's crusade against Kratom was a setup for a cushy pharmaceutical gig? No. Proof would require evidence, and nobody's going to find a memo that says, ban the plant so we can patent the molecule. But it is the kind of revolving door that makes people point and laugh when you tell them the FDA is an independent regulatory agency protecting public health. The man who spent 2 years trying to ban Kratom walked straight into the arms of an industry that would profit from that ban. The timing was either unfortunate or hilarious, depending on your level of cynicism. The Kratom community's level of cynicism went through the roof, and honestly, fair. In 2020, something unexpected happened. Actual science showed up, wearing a Johns Hopkins sweatshirt and carrying data. Researchers at one of the most respected medical institutions in the country published the first large-scale survey of Kratom users. Over 2,000 participants. Detailed questions about use patterns, effects, side effects, withdrawal experiences, the whole picture. The findings didn't match the FDA's narrative. Most users reported taking Kratom for pain management or to quit opioids. Most reported benefits with manageable side effects. The dependency profile looked more like caffeine than heroin. Real, but not catastrophic. Withdrawal was uncomfortable, not deadly. overdose risk appeared low. The paper suggested carefully and scientifically that Kratom might actually be helping people, that the risk profile was complicated but not apocalyptic, that maybe, just maybe, the dangerous opioid framing was a bit much. The Kratom community treated this like the Dead Sea Scrolls of vindication. Finally, real research from Johns Hopkins. Take that. FDA algorithm. The FDA was not impressed. Survey data, they pointed out, only captures people who like Kratom enough to fill out surveys about it. Selection bias. The people who tried Kratom had a nightmare and never touched it again, weren't answering questionnaires. This was technically true and completely beside the point. The survey was the most rigorous data anyone had bothered to collect. It wasn't perfect, no study is, but it was better than a computer model and a pile of contested death reports. The findings said Kratom was complicated. Both sides heard what they wanted to hear. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, Thailand was having a moment of clarity. Remember Thailand? Banned Kratom in 1943 to protect the government's opium monopoly, made it illegal to harvest leaves from trees that had been growing there for thousands of years. That Thailand. In 2021, they legalized Kratom, not because they'd forgotten the prohibition, because they'd looked at almost 80 years of evidence and concluded that maybe, just maybe, banning a mild stimulant to protect heroin profits had been a stupid idea from the start. Thai officials started talking about Kratom's traditional uses, medical research programs, economic opportunity for farmers. The same talking points American advocates had been making for years, except now they were coming from a government that had actually changed its mind. The country that invented Kratom prohibition was ending it. The country that copied the prohibition was still arguing about whether to make it worse. If there's a cosmic joke in this story, Thailand is the punchline. They figured it out. 80 years late, but they figured it out. America was taking notes. Very, very slowly. By 2022, the federal government had effectively given up. Not officially, nobody declared defeat, but practically the FDA stopped pushing for a national ban. The political capital wasn't there. The fentanyl crisis was killing 100,000 people a year. Kratom, by comparison, was a rounding error. Why fight a war you keep losing over a product that might be killing dozens when another product is killing thousands every month? So the states stepped in. 50 states, 50 different approaches, 50 different ways to create total chaos. Alabama banned Kratom. So did Arkansas, Indiana, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Wisconsin. If you live in those states, possession is a crime. You could go to jail for having the same bottle that's legal 30 miles away. 16 other states passed something called the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, an industry-written bill that sets age limits, requires some testing, and most importantly keeps the FDA completely out of the picture. It looks like regulation. It smells like regulation. It's actually a legal shield disguised as consumer protection. The other 28 states exist in various states of confusion, legal but unregulated. Legal except in these specific counties. Legal until a local prosecutor decides it isn't. The map makes no sense because the policy makes no sense. You can buy Kratom at a gas station in Texas, drive across the border to Arkansas, and become a criminal without changing anything except your GPS coordinates. Same bottle, same substance, different laws. This is what 50 different laboratories of democracy looks like when none of them are talking to each other. While everyone was fighting about whether 2016-era Kratom should be legal, the products on the shelves had already evolved into something else. The powder that started all these debates, almost quaint by 2023. The extracts were stronger, the shots were stronger than the extracts, and the new, concentrated isolates, pure active compound with a dusting of leaf for legal cover, was something the early Kratom community wouldn't have recognised. All the safety data, such as it was, came from traditional use: leaves, powder. The gentle version that Thai farmers had been chewing for centuries. Nobody had studied what the shots do. Nobody had longitudinal data on the extracts. Nobody knew what happens when you take pure isolated compound every day for years, because nobody had been taking pure isolated compound every day for years. The industry was selling products that had outpaced the research by a decade. The advocates were defending Kratom with data about powder, while the shelves filled with something else entirely. The FDA was warning about a substance that was already shape-shifting into its next form. The argument was about yesterday's Kratom. The gas stations were selling tomorrow's. And somewhere in all of this, the patents and politics, the computer models, and the contaminated shipments, the revolving doors and patchwork laws, there were actual people, 15 million of them by some estimates, taking Kratom every day. Some because it helped with pain their doctors wouldn't treat. Some because it kept them off heroin. Some because they'd seen it at a gas station and thought, why not? Some because they were already dependent and the thought of stopping made them sick. They weren't waiting for the FDA to figure it out. They weren't waiting for more studies. They weren't waiting for the states to agree on whether they were criminals or consumers. They were navigating the fog themselves. One dose at a time, swapping tips on internet forums, warning each other about which products hit too hard, teaching each other how to taper if they needed to quit. An underground harm reduction network built by strangers because nobody else was going to help them. The official war was being fought in Washington and state capitals, with press releases and lobbying budgets. The real war was being fought in living rooms and parking lots, by people who just wanted to feel okay and had no idea who to trust. But here's a question nobody was asking. Why was any of this legal in the first place? An opioid at a gas station. No prescription, no doctor, no oversight. How does that happen in a country that regulates the aspirin dosage on children's Tylenol? The answer has two parts. The first is an American law most people have never heard of. The second is that no other country made the same mistake. In 1994, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, home to half the supplement industry in America, pushed through a law called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. The backstory was pure American theatre. The FDA had tried to regulate supplements, basic stuff like safety testing and honest labels. The supplement industry responded by hiring Mel Gibson and Whoopi Goldberg to run television ads, warning Americans that the government wanted to take away their vitamins. This wasn't true, but "they're coming for your vitamins" fits on a bumper sticker better than the FDA wants to verify health claims. Congressional phone lines melted down. The industry won. DSHEA changed the rules. Before, the FDA could require proof that a product was safe before it hit shelves. After, the FDA had to prove it was dangerous after people were already taking it. Innocent until proven guilty. The burden flipped. The law also grandfathered in everything already on the market. Any ingredient sold before 1994. Automatically legal. No testing required. This created a door. Ephedra walked through and killed 155 people before the FDA finally banned it in 2004, after a decade of legal fighting. Contaminated supplements walked through. Products with hidden drugs walked through. And Kratom walked through like it belonged there. A plant. Natural. Traditional use in Southeast Asia. Not explicitly a drug. The perfect candidate for the supplement loophole. The FDA could call it an opioid all they wanted. Under DSHEA, that wasn't enough to stop it. Here's what makes the American situation absurd. Almost nobody else did this. The same plant, the same molecules, completely different legal status depending on which country you're standing in. In the United Kingdom, Kratom is illegal, completely, since 2016. The UK didn't specifically target Kratom. They did something more dramatic. They banned everything. The Psychoactive Substances Act made it illegal to produce, supply, or possess any substance intended to produce a psychoactive effect unless it was specifically exempted. Alcohol, exempted. Caffeine, exempted. Tobacco, exempted. Kratom, not on the list. Overnight, it became illegal to sell. The law was designed to deal with synthetic drugs, the legal highs that kept appearing faster than regulators could ban them individually. Instead of playing whack-a-mole, Parliament banned the whole arcade. Kratom got caught in the net. Did it work? Depends on your definition. Kratom use in the UK dropped. Kratom users in the UK became criminals. The market went underground. The problems became invisible instead of solved. But here's what didn't happen in the UK. Kratom shots at gas stations. Concentrated extracts at convenience stores. A billion-dollar industry selling increasingly potent products to people who had no idea what they were getting. The UK's approach was blunt, maybe too blunt, but it was an approach. America's approach was no approach at all. Australia went even further. Kratom is Schedule 9 in Australia, the most restrictive category. Same classification as heroin. Possession is illegal. Importation is illegal. The penalties are serious. The Therapeutic Goods Administration made this decision in 2003, updated it in 2015. Their reasoning was straightforward. Kratom contains compounds that act on opioid receptors. It has abuse potential, and it has no approved medical use in Australia. Schedule 9. Australian drug scheduling tends toward prohibition. They were slower than most Western countries to allow medical cannabis. They still classify MDMA as equivalent to heroin. The TGA's default position is ban it until proven safe, which is essentially the opposite of DESIGA's sell it until proven dangerous. The result? No Kratom industry in Australia, no gas station shots, no escalation from powder to extracts to isolates. Australian Kratom users exist. People always find ways, but they're buying from underground sources, breaking the law with all the risks that entails. Is that better? Worse? The honest answer is nobody knows. Australia doesn't have America's Kratom problem. They also don't have America's Kratom benefits, whatever those turn out to be. They made a choice. America didn't. Then there's Malaysia, and this is where the absurdity reaches its peak. Kratom is native to Malaysia. The trees grow wild there. The plant has been part of Malaysian culture for centuries, used by indigenous communities long before Europeans showed up to name things. In Malaysia, Kratom is illegal. The law dates back to 1952, colonial-era drug legislation that the independent Malaysian government kept and strengthened. Possession can get you fined or imprisoned. Sale is a serious crime. This means that in Malaysia you can walk into a jungle, find a Kratom tree that's been growing there for hundreds of years, pick a leaf and commit a crime. The same leaf that's legal to buy at a gas station in Texas, the same leaf your ancestors have been using forever. The enforcement is real. People get arrested for Kratom in Malaysia. The government treats it as a drug problem, even though, or maybe because, the trees are literally right there, growing wild, indifferent to Malaysian law. Why? The official answer involves public health concerns. The practical answer involves decades of prohibitionist momentum and nobody wanting to look soft on drugs. Once a ban exists, it develops its own political gravity. Reversing it requires admitting the original decision was wrong. Malaysia hasn't had that moment yet. But Malaysia still arrests people for picking leaves from native trees. The plant doesn't know about borders. The law doesn't know about logic. The European picture is fragmented. Germany, France, and the Netherlands allow Kratom, with restrictions in some cases, without in others. Italy bans it, Poland bans it, Ireland bans it, Sweden bans it, Denmark allows it, Finland doesn't. There's no EU-wide policy. Each country made its own decision, based on its own assessment, influenced by its own politics. The result is a patchwork that makes the American state-by-state chaos look almost coherent. A German tourist can buy Kratom legally at home, fly to Poland, and become a criminal for having the same product in their luggage. The molecule didn't change. The laws did. This happens with lots of substances, of course. Drug policy is always a mess of national boundaries and arbitrary distinctions. But Kratom is a particularly good example because nobody can agree on what it even is. Is it a dangerous opioid? That's what the FDA says. Is it a mild stimulant with traditional use? That's what Thai officials now say. Is it a psychoactive substance that should be banned by default? That's what the UK decided. Is it a supplement that doesn't require regulation? That's what American law assumes. Same plant, same leaves, same molecules. Completely different answers depending on who you ask and where you're standing. The international comparison reveals something important. America's Kratom situation isn't inevitable. It's not that Kratom inherently becomes a gas station opioid. Other countries have the same plant available, or at least the same plant attempting to get in through their borders, and they made different choices. Some chose prohibition. Heavy-handed, maybe counterproductive, but a choice. Some chose regulation, controlled access, quality standards, medical oversight. America chose neither. America chose a law written for vitamins that accidentally created a path for anything that could call itself a supplement. A law that asks companies to prove nothing and requires regulators to prove everything. The Kratom industry didn't create the loophole. They just recognized it and walked through. Before we get to the science, let's talk about something the Kratom industry doesn't want you to think too hard about. The strains are mostly nonsense. Walk into any Kratom vendor, online or physical, and you'll find an elaborate taxonomy. Red barley, green Malay, white Ming Da, red Borneo, green Vietnam, white Thai. Names that sound like they mean something. Categories that imply precision. The marketing tells a story. Red strains are sedating, good for pain and relaxation. White strains are stimulating, good for energy and focus. Green strains are somewhere in between, the balanced option. Each region supposedly produces distinctive effects. Mangda means pimp grade in Thai and implies superior quality. Barley suggests traditional sourcing. Vietnam sounds exotic. Customers believe this. They develop preferences. They'll tell you they can only use red barley for sleep and white Mung Da for work. They've built rituals around strain selection. The forums are full of detailed comparisons. Here's the thing. There's almost no science supporting any of it. When researchers have actually tested Kratom products labelled as different strains, the alkaloid profiles don't consistently match the names. A red barley from one vendor might have a completely different chemical composition than red barley from another vendor. The same vendor's red barley might vary batch to batch. The labels don't predict the contents. The red-green-white distinction supposedly comes from vein colour in the leaves, but vein colour changes with maturity, growing conditions, and time of harvest. And here's the real secret. The colour of the final powder has more to do with drying methods than vein colour. Dry leaves in the sun and they turn one shade, dry them indoors and they turn another, ferment them and they turn red. Indonesian farmers, the people actually producing this stuff, often don't use the strain names at all. They harvest leaves, dry them using whatever method they prefer, and sell powder to exporters. The strain names get applied later, sometimes at the export level, sometimes by American vendors, sometimes seemingly at random. This doesn't mean all Kratom is identical. The alkaloid ratios do vary. Different batches do feel different to users. But the variation doesn't map onto the neat taxonomy the industry sells. You're not choosing between distinct products with reliable characteristics. You're playing a lottery where the ticket says red barley, but the numbers inside are anyone's guess. The industry has no incentive to fix this. The strain mythology sells product. People pay more for premium strains. They come back to chase the experience they had with that one batch of White Mangda that hit just right. The confusion is a feature, not a bug. It's herbal astrology. People believe it because they want categories. The categories don't exist in any rigorous sense, but they help sell powder at different price points. The extract market is even wilder. At least with powder, you're mostly getting ground up leaves. The alkaloid content varies, but there's a natural ceiling. You can't have more than 100% leaf. Extracts have no ceiling, or rather the ceiling is wherever the manufacturer decides to stop concentrating. When a product says 10x extract, what does that mean? 10 times as potent as regular leaf, 10 times the alkaloid content per gram, 10 times as likely to cause problems. The labelling isn't standardised. A 10x from one company might be weaker than a 5x from another. The numbers are marketing, not measurements. Some extracts are genuine concentrations, alkaloids pulled from large quantities of leaf and condensed into smaller volumes. Some are powder sprinkled with isolated alkaloids to boost potency. Some are. Nobody really knows. Without testing requirements, without standardized methods, without anyone checking, the numbers on the label are essentially decorative. The customers buying these products are making decisions based on fiction. They think they're choosing between precisely calibrated options. They're actually navigating a fog of marketing claims with no reliable map. This matters because potency matters. Someone who's been taking powder and switches to an extract expecting similar effects might be in for a very different experience. Someone who's been using a 15x from one vendor and switches to a 15x from another might accidentally double or triple their dose. The lack of standards isn't just a labelling problem, it's a safety problem wearing a labelling costume. There's another version of the Kratom industry, one that doesn't involve gas stations or convenience stores or shots in little bottles. Kratom bars. They started appearing in Florida around 2010, then spread to Colorado, North Carolina, Texas, other states. Physical establishments, storefronts with chairs and tables and actual menus, where you can walk in and order Kratom the way you'd order coffee. The vibe is deliberately different from the gas station model. Kava and Kratom bars often look like hip juice joints or chill tea lounges, wooden furniture, ambient lighting, bartenders who can explain the options, a sense that you're participating in something intentional, not just grabbing a bottle next to the energy drinks. The menus list Kratom preparations by strain and strength. You can get powder mixed into drinks, or take capsules, or try different preparations. Many places also serve kava, the Pacific Island root that produces relaxation without the opioid receptor activity. The combination positions Kratom as part of a broader alternative wellness scene. The prices are higher than gas station shots. A drink might run $8 to $15, but you're paying for environment, curation, someone to talk to about what you're taking. The experience is social in a way that buying a bottle at 7-Eleven isn't. The bars attract a different clientele. Fewer people in acute opioid withdrawal looking for immediate relief. More people interested in the social ritual, the relaxation, the alternative to alcohol. The marketing leans hard on the natural angle. This is an ancient plant used traditionally for centuries, now available in a civilized setting. Some bars have staff who actually know about Kratom, dosing, effects, what to expect. Some have harm reduction practices, like suggesting first-time users start small. Some check in with regulars who seem to be escalating. It's not universal, but it exists. This is what regulated Kratom culture could look like. Knowledgeable vendors, controlled environment, social norms around responsible use, a reason to moderate because you're in public and someone's watching. The gas station model has none of this. Nobody at 7-Eleven is going to ask if you've used Kratom before. Nobody's suggesting you start with a low dose. Nobody's going to notice if you're buying 3 shots a day. The transaction is anonymous, fast, designed for maximum convenience and zero friction. 2 models of the same product. One treats Kratom as something that requires context. The other treats it as something you grab next to the Red Bull. Guess which model is growing faster? The Kratom bar scene has its own problems, of course. The quality control is still questionable. Bars source from suppliers who face the same lack of regulation as everyone else. The powder in your artisanal Kratom smoothie might be contaminated with salmonella just like the powder in a gas station bag. The staff expertise varies wildly. Some bars employ people with genuine knowledge. Others employ people who read the marketing materials and repeat them with confidence. The barista explaining strain differences might be reciting mythology with a straight face, and the atmosphere can create its own kind of trap. The social setting normalizes daily use. People become regulars. The bar becomes part of their routine. The community aspect makes it harder to recognize when a habit has become a problem. But there's something interesting about the bar model that the gas station model completely lacks: visibility. When you're buying shots at a gas station, nobody sees. Your use is private. You could escalate to 3, 4, 5 shots a day and nobody would know until something went wrong. When you're going to a Kratom bar, you're going to a place. People see you there. The staff recognizes you. There's a social check, however imperfect, on what you're doing. This isn't a solution. It's not even regulation. But it's something other than the anonymous transaction that dominates the American Kratom market. The bars prove that a different model is possible. They don't prove that model is better, just that it exists. Now let's talk about where all this Kratom actually comes from, and what almost happened in 2024. The American Kratom supply has a single point of failure: Indonesia. 95% of the Kratom sold in America comes from Indonesian Borneo, mostly from a province called West Kalimantan. The trees grow there naturally. The climate is perfect. The labour is cheap. And until about 15 years ago, nobody there had any idea Americans would pay good money for leaves they'd been ignoring for generations. The boom transformed villages. Farmers who'd been growing rubber or palm oil discovered that Kratom paid better. Way better. A kilo of dried Kratom leaves could fetch prices that made traditional crops look like charity. Families that had been poor for generations started building concrete houses. Motorcycles appeared in villages that used to rely on boats. By 2020, Kratom had become a major regional industry. Tens of thousands of families depended on it. Processing facilities had been built. Export networks had been established. The entire supply chain, from jungle trees to American gas stations, ran through a handful of Indonesian ports. Then the Indonesian government started asking questions. The questions were reasonable. Why should Indonesia take the blame for American addiction problems? Why should Indonesian farmers be connected to a product that was killing people in a country most of them had never visited? Why was their national reputation being tied to a substance that other countries were banning? In 2019, the Indonesian government announced a plan to ban Kratom exports by 2024. The American Kratom industry, which had spent years fighting the FDA and the DEA and state legislatures, suddenly faced a different kind of threat. You can lobby Congress. You can't lobby the Indonesian Ministry of Trade. The Kratom community panicked. If Indonesia banned exports, there was no backup. Malaysia? Illegal there. Thailand? Just legalized, but production capacity was minimal. Vietnam? Some Kratom, not enough. Indonesia was the whole game. Lose Indonesia. Lose everything. American Kratom advocates started reaching out to Indonesian officials. The American Kratom Association sent representatives. They made economic arguments. Think of the farmers. Think of the jobs. Think of the foreign exchange revenue. They made diplomatic arguments. Banning Kratom wouldn't solve America's problems. It would just hurt Indonesian communities. The Indonesian farmers themselves organised. They'd seen what happened when palm oil faced international pressure. Falling prices, uncertain futures, communities devastated. They didn't want Kratom to go the same way. Farmer associations formed. Local politicians got involved. The people whose livelihoods depended on the trade started making noise. The 2024 deadline came and went. Indonesia didn't ban Kratom exports. The government quietly backed off, citing the need for more study, the economic importance of the industry, the complexity of the situation. The same kind of language American regulators had used when they backed down. The supply chain survived, for now. But the close call revealed something important. The American Kratom industry is balanced on a knife's edge. One decision by one foreign government could end it overnight, not phase it out over years. End it. The shipping containers would stop arriving. The supply would dry up within weeks. Every gas station, every head shop, every online vendor would face empty shelves and no way to restock. The industry has no contingency plan. There's no domestic cultivation to speak of. Kratom trees need tropical conditions, and America doesn't have much tropics. There's no strategic reserve. There's no backup source at anything close to the necessary scale. The entire billion-dollar market depends on the continued cooperation of Indonesian farmers and Indonesian officials, none of whom are bound by any agreement to keep the product flowing. This vulnerability exists because nobody built the industry to last. It grew too fast, driven by demand rather than planning. The supply chain was assembled by entrepreneurs chasing opportunity, not by strategists thinking long-term. It works until it doesn't. The FDA, which would love to see Kratom disappear, is probably aware of this. One wonders if anyone has thought to make a phone call to Jakarta. Then there's the question of what's actually in the products. The answer, in a shocking number of cases, is not just Kratom. Independent testing has found all kinds of things in products sold as Kratom. Heavy metals, lead, arsenic, mercury, at levels that would trigger recalls if these were food products. Mold and bacteria from improper storage or contaminated processing facilities. Filler materials bulking out expensive powder with cheap additives, and in some cases other drugs entirely. In 2018, the FDA found a compound called O-desmethyltramadol in some Kratom products. O-desmethyltramadol is a synthetic opioid, a metabolite of tramadol produced in a lab with no connection to Kratom leaves whatsoever. Someone had added it to boost potency, either intentionally or through cross-contamination in a facility processing multiple substances. The products were recalled. The company faced enforcement action. But the incident revealed a disturbing possibility. Some Kratom products might not actually be Kratom, or might be Kratom spiked with something stronger, or might be Kratom contaminated with something dangerous that has nothing to do with the plant. This isn't a theoretical concern, it's documented. Multiple testing programs have found multiple problems in multiple products from multiple vendors. The lack of regulation isn't just a labeling problem. It's a you don't actually know what you're ingesting problem. The powder that looks like Kratom might be Kratom. It might be Kratom plus heavy metals. It might be Kratom plus synthetic opioids. It might be mostly filler with a dusting of Kratom for flavour. The customer has no way to know. The gas station cashier has no way to know. The vendor might not know. The supply chain is opaque enough that contamination can enter at any point and exit undetected. Some companies do third-party testing. They send samples to labs, publish the results, market themselves as verified or certified or tested for purity. This is better than nothing, but it's not actually regulation. The company chooses which batches to test. The company chooses which results to publish. The company chooses the lab, and not all labs are equal. There's no government oversight verifying that the testing is real, accurate, or representative of what's actually being sold. It's trust all the way down. Trust that the company tested accurately. Trust that the published results match the product you're buying. Trust that what's on the shelf is the same as what was in the test sample. Trust that nobody in the supply chain made a swap after the testing happened. The reputable vendors probably do test honestly. They have business reasons to. A contamination scandal would destroy their reputation and open them to lawsuits. But reputable vendors aren't the only vendors, and the gas station shots probably aren't coming from the most scrupulous sources. The adulteration problem connects to the potency arms race. If your business model depends on having the strongest product, and your competitors are also trying to have the strongest product, the temptation to cheat is significant. Why spend money on careful extraction when you could just add some synthetic compound and achieve the same effect? Who's going to check? This is what happens without regulation. Without testing requirements, without inspections, without enforcement, the incentives reward cutting corners. Companies that do things properly compete against companies that don't, and the companies that don't have lower costs. The race to the bottom isn't hypothetical. It's playing out in products on shelves right now. The people buying them don't know it. They think they're choosing between different Kratom products. They might be choosing between Kratom and Kratom Plus Surprise. So here's where we are. America has a law from 1994 that lets Kratom exist in a regulatory vacuum. Other countries either banned it or regulated it. America did neither. The supply chain depends entirely on Indonesia, which nearly banned exports and could still do so at any time. The products on shelves may contain heavy metals, mold, synthetic opioids, or mystery additives, and nobody is required to check. The strains are marketing fiction. The potency numbers are meaningless. The quality assurance is voluntary and unverified, and the gas station keeps making the sale. The loophole stays open. The fog stays thick. The money keeps flowing. Somewhere in Indonesia, a farmer is harvesting leaves. Somewhere in America, a customer is buying a bottle. Between them, 8,000 miles of supply chain, 0 points of mandatory inspection, and a prayer that nothing went wrong along the way. This is what it looks like when nobody takes responsibility. We've talked about the plant, the products, the politics, the loopholes, the chaos. Now let's talk about the thing this story is actually about. Because Kratom isn't special. Kratom isn't even unusual. Kratom is just the latest iteration of a story America's been telling for over a century. A story with a pattern so predictable it's almost boring. Let's trace it. Start with opium. Humans have known about opium for 5,000 years. The Sumerians called the poppy plant Hul Gil, the joy plant. Ancient civilizations used it for pain, for sleep, for the simple pleasure of feeling good. It worked. It was addictive. But at the doses available through traditional use, smoking, eating, brewing tea, the damage was limited. Then, in 1804, a German pharmacist named Friedrich Sertuner did something clever. He isolated the active compound from opium and purified it. He called it morphine, after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. Morphine was a miracle, 10 times more potent than raw opium, precise dosing, injectable. Surgeons could operate on patients who would have screamed through the procedure otherwise. Soldiers could survive wounds that would have killed them from shock. The American Civil War ran on morphine. Field surgeons carried it everywhere. Men who would have died in agony lived long enough to go home. Many of them went home addicted. Soldier's disease, they called it. Hundreds of thousands of veterans dependent on a drug that hadn't existed before they enlisted. the first mass opioid epidemic in American history. The first time the pattern revealed itself, a substance that helped, concentrated beyond traditional limits, distributed widely, addiction following like a shadow. The solution to morphine addiction was obvious: find something less addictive. In 1898, Bayer Pharmaceutical Company, yes, the aspirin people, introduced a new product. They called it heroin from heroisch, German for heroic, because of how it made patients feel. Heroin was marketed as a safe alternative to morphine, non-addictive, a way to wean patients off morphine dependence. Doctors prescribed it freely. Mothers gave it to children for coughs. This wasn't cynical deception. They actually believed it. The early studies seemed to support it. Heroin, they thought, was the answer. It wasn't the answer. Heroin was more addictive than morphine. The withdrawal was worse. The dependence formed faster. By the time anyone figured this out, millions of people were hooked. The United States banned heroin in 1924. The safe alternative had become the new problem. The solution had needed its own solution, the pattern again. A substance introduced to fix the previous substance. Claims of safety, widespread adoption, discovery that the claims were wrong, prohibition, and the people who were addicted, they didn't disappear. They just became criminals. For decades after heroin, doctors were careful with opioids. They'd seen what happened. They'd learned the lesson. Opioids were for cancer patients, for end-of-life care, for the most extreme situations. Prescriptions were limited. Caution was the standard. Then came the 1990s. Then came Purdue Pharma. Then came OxyContin. The story of OxyContin is the story of how America forgot everything it had learned. Purdue's pitch was elegant. OxyContin was oxycodone, a strong opioid, but in a time-release formulation. The slow release, they argued, made it safe. No dangerous peaks, no euphoric rush, just steady pain relief, around the clock with minimal addiction risk. Less than 1% of patients become addicted, the sales representatives told doctors. They cited a study. The study existed. It said something different than what they claimed, but it existed. Purdue funded pain advocacy groups that pushed doctors to prescribe more opioids. They targeted the highest prescribing physicians with bonuses and rewards. They minimized reports of addiction. They created a marketing machine that turned skeptical doctors into eager prescribers. It worked spectacularly. OxyContin sales went from $44 million in 1996 to $1.5 billion by 2002. Opioid prescriptions across America tripled. Patients who'd never been able to get pain relief were suddenly drowning in pills. Internal documents later reveal that Purdue knew the addiction risks were higher than they claimed. They knew the time release could be defeated by crushing the pills. They knew, and they kept selling. By the time the lawsuits hit, by the time the truth came out, by the time Purdue pleaded guilty to federal charges, twice, the damage was done. Millions addicted, hundreds of thousands dead. The largest drug epidemic in American history, created not by drug dealers on street corners but by pharmaceutical executives in boardrooms. The pattern perfected. A substance that helped some people, marketed as safe when it wasn't, pushed beyond appropriate limits by profit motive, defended long past the point of plausibility, reckoning that came too late to save everyone it killed. You might think opioids are special. You'd be wrong. Look at cocaine. The coca leaf has been chewed in South America for at least 8,000 years. Workers in the Andes used it for altitude sickness, for energy, for daily life. The effects were mild, roughly equivalent to strong coffee. Traditional use worked fine for millennia. Then, a German chemist named Albert Niemann isolated cocaine from coca leaves in 1860. Concentrated the active ingredient, removed the natural limits. Cocaine became a wonder drug. Sigmund Freud wrote papers praising it. Coca-Cola contained it until Night Dust 3. Doctors prescribed it for everything from depression to morphine addiction. It was legal, popular, and everywhere. Then came the concentrated powder, the higher doses, the addiction, the epidemic. The United States banned cocaine in 1914. The wonder drug had become a menace, but the demand didn't disappear. 50 years later, cocaine came back. Different form, same story. Powder for the wealthy. Crack, processed for smoking, cheaper per dose, for everyone else. The crack epidemic of the 1980s devastated communities. The government response was incarceration, not treatment. The sentencing disparity, 5 grams of crack got you the same prison time as 500 grams of powder, was racist by design and racist in effect. Same plant as the coca leaves that Andean farmers have been chewing safely for 8,000 years. Concentrated, optimized, catastrophe, amphetamines, same pattern, synthesized in 1887, ignored for decades. Then World War II, and suddenly every army needed soldiers who could stay awake for days. The Allies used Benzedrine. The Germans used Pervitin. Millions of pills distributed to millions of troops. After the war, the pills came home. Amphetamines became diet pills for housewives, study aids for students, energy boosters for truckers. Legal, prescribed, everywhere. Then came the abuse, the addiction, the meth labs cooking their own supply, the rural epidemic that's still ongoing, still devastating communities, still being treated as a moral failure rather than a public health crisis. Same pattern, a substance with legitimate uses, concentrated and distributed beyond those uses, market forces pushing harder, faster, more, consequences denied until they were undeniable, and now Kratom, a leaf chewed traditionally for centuries, concentrated into powder, extracted into liquids, isolated into pure compounds, each step following the pattern, each escalation predictable to anyone who'd been paying attention. We didn't learn from morphine, we didn't learn from heroin, we didn't learn from OxyContin or cocaine or meth. Why would Kratom be different? The pattern persists because the conditions that create it persist. Start with demand. Humans experience pain. Physical pain, emotional pain, the pain of existence in a world that isn't always kind. We look for relief. We always have. We always will. In a functioning system, that demand gets met through appropriate channels. Doctors who listen, treatments that work, access that doesn't require wealth or luck. America doesn't have that system. We have expensive healthcare that millions can't afford. We have doctors who won't prescribe pain relief because they're afraid of regulators. We have insurance companies that deny treatments and recovery programs with year-long wait lists. When the legitimate channels fail, people find other channels. That's not moral weakness. That's rational behavior in an irrational system. Kratom exists in the space where American healthcare failed. The demand it meets is demand that should have been met elsewhere. Then there's supply. In a functioning market, dangerous products get regulated. Companies that sell harmful products face consequences. Quality standards protect consumers from the worst outcomes. America doesn't have that system for supplements. We have DSEHEA, which assumes supplements are safe until proven deadly. We have an FDA that can't act until after the damage is done. We have an industry that writes its own rules and calls it consumer protection. When a product falls into this regulatory void, the market optimizes for profit. Stronger products sell better than weaker ones. Testing costs money that reduces margins. Safety warnings scare away customers. The incentives all point toward escalation. Kratom escalated because the system incentivized escalation. powder wasn't strong enough to maximize profits, extracts were better, shots were better still. The market found the path of least resistance, and the path led where it always leads. Finally, there's the response. In a functioning policy environment, emerging problems get addressed before they become crises. Regulators adapt, laws evolve, the system learns. America doesn't have that environment. We have a drug war framework that sees every substance as either legal or illegal, with nothing in between. We have politics that punishes nuance and rewards extremism. We have agencies captured by the industries they're supposed to regulate. When Kratom emerged as a potential problem, the system couldn't respond appropriately. The FDA wanted to ban it, the only tool they knew how to use. The industry wanted to keep it unregulated, the only outcome that served their interests. Nobody had the power or the will to find a middle ground. So there was no middle ground. There was just the status quo, unregulated, escalating, accumulating damage that nobody was tracking. The pattern isn't about drugs. The pattern is about systems. Functioning systems catch problems early. They adapt. They find solutions that aren't ban everything or regulate nothing. They learn from history. Broken systems repeat the same mistakes. They oscillate between extremes. They generate the same outcomes decade after decade with different substances playing the same roles. America has broken systems. Broken healthcare that creates demand for self-medication. Broken regulation that lets dangerous products flourish. Broken politics that can't address problems until they're catastrophes. Kratom didn't break these systems. These systems were already broken. Kratom just walked through the cracks. So what happens now? The honest answer, probably what always happens. The products will get stronger until something forces a change. The problems will accumulate until they're impossible to ignore. The reckoning will come. Lawsuits, regulations, public outcry. Not because anyone planned it, but because reckonings always come eventually. When it happens, everyone will act surprised. The industry will claim they didn't know. The regulators will claim they tried their best. The politicians will hold hearings and express concern and pass laws that should have been passed years earlier. The people who were helped by Kratom will tell their stories. The people who were hurt will tell theirs. Both will be true. Both will be used by different sides to argue different conclusions, and at some point the conversation will move on to the next substance, the next crisis, the next iteration of the pattern. Because the pattern doesn't end when one substance gets regulated or banned. The pattern continues because the conditions that create it continue. The demand, the void, the broken systems. If Kratom disappeared tomorrow, something else would fill the space. The people in pain would still be in pain. The market would still see opportunity. The loopholes would still exist. The pattern isn't about Kratom. The pattern is about us. It's late now. Somewhere, a veteran is lying awake, counting the hours until his next dose, managing pain that the VA won't treat and civilians don't understand. Somewhere, a 20-year-old is trying Kratom for the first time, because a friend said it was like a natural energy drink, because it was on the shelf, so it must be safe, because nobody told her what she was actually buying. Somewhere, a mother is reading forum posts at 3 a.m, trying to understand what happened to her son, finding more information from strangers on the internet than from any doctor she's consulted. Somewhere, a farmer in Indonesia is waking up before dawn to harvest leaves, feeding his family on American demand, sending product into a supply chain he doesn't control, to customers he'll never meet. Somewhere, a product developer is testing a new formulation, stronger than last quarter's version, ready for the gas station shelves by summer. They're all in the same story, the same pattern, connected by supply chains and regulatory failures and the simple human desire to feel okay. Here's what I keep thinking about. Every substance in the pattern started as something that helped people. Morphine helped. Heroin was supposed to help. OxyContin helped, at first, for some people. Cocaine helped. Amphetamines helped. Kratom helps. That's real. The testimonials aren't lies. The veterans who found relief, the addicts who escaped heroin, the chronic pain patients who got their lives back. They exist. Their gratitude is genuine. The pattern isn't about substances that were always bad. It's about substances that were good until they weren't, until the concentration went too high, until the marketing pushed too hard, until the money mattered more than the consequences. The tragedy is that help and harm come from the same source. The molecule that relieves your pain is the same molecule that builds your dependence. The product that saves one person traps another. And we keep acting like we can have one without the other, like we can optimize the benefits and eliminate the risks. Like this time will be different. It's never different. The pattern continues because we keep expecting different results from the same conditions. The gas station is still open, the shelf is still stocked, the bottles are still there, waiting for whoever needs them, or thinks they do, or doesn't know the difference. The cashier won't ask questions, the label won't tell the whole story. The supply chain stretches 8,000 miles through a dozen hands with nobody responsible for what happens at the end. This is the system we built. This is the pattern we keep repeating. Somewhere, someone is about to make a choice, to buy or not buy, to take or not take, to become part of the statistics on one side or the other. They don't know the history, they don't know the pattern, they don't know that this moment, the moment of first contact with a substance that might help or might harm, has happened millions of times before, with different substances in different eras, with outcomes ranging from salvation to catastrophe. They just know they're in pain, or curious, or desperate, or bored. They just know the product is there, legal and available, and nobody's stopping them.